Hello everybody, and welcome to the second episode of the Gabriel Al-Salem Foundation's live series, Consulting Without Borders Perspectives. We've committed to do this broadcast on the first day of each month to feature and have a dialogue with prominent international consultants and experts whose work is related to global challenges. Last month, on March 1st, we had the pleasure of having here in the studio Ron Finch from Canada, who is an environmental engineer and consultant. And today, we are delighted to have a conversation on international development consulting, its challenges and opportunities with Dr. Stephen Tupper from the UK. But Stephen will be joining us actually from Ukraine today. Stephen has been working as international development consultant for over 30 years, since 1986. He worked on both commercial and international development projects funded by the major donor organizations such as the World Bank, the USAID, Asian Development Bank, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Stephen has led teams working on issues of poverty reduction, regional development and governance, which were involving stakeholders from the government, the private sector, NGOs, and civil groups of local population. To produce a positive result, Stephen has always put inclusion as a key factor, together with the need for creative and innovative partnerships. Stephen has worked all over the globe, in Europe, Asia, North Africa, Middle East, and in parts of the Pacific. Since 1917, we've had the pleasure of having Stephen Tupper as part of our foundation's board of directors. And he has been so helpful with all of our activities, including our annual conference, Consulting Without Borders, which we do on February 1st. I haven't introduced myself. For those who don't know me, my name is Victoria Olskaya. I am the president of Gabriel Al-Salem Foundation and the moderator of today's show. So I'm very happy to bring here Stephen Tupper, who is joining us live from Ukraine, where he has actually worked for many years and where he is currently helping evacuees to find new homes in Europe and specifically in the UK. Welcome, Stephen.
Hi, good afternoon. It's very hard to know where to start, except to say that I am now facing the largest international development challenge of my entire career, which is going to be the future reconstruction of Ukraine after the Russian invasion of February the 24th. I don't want to talk too much about events in Ukraine for the simple reason that there's a lot in the press, but let me just explain how I ended up here in Lviv and why I'm doing what I'm doing in Lviv at the moment.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I was, or I still am, in fact, the team leader of the regional projects team of the EU multi-donor funded program called ULEAD with Europe. And our work was primarily concentrating upon the development of local development projects of regional significance, which we work with gromadas or little municipalities with populations of less than 50,000 at the bottom end of the administrative tier in Ukraine. So you can think about national level, then we have regional levels, of which there are 25, and then the local levels where we work at. Now, we were working on a number of projects when the war started. I myself was in Kiev, which was our headquarters. By sheer fluke, I had actually planned a trial evacuation of my friends and relatives for the 25th, but unfortunately, Mr. Putin did everything a day earlier than I had planned. But I managed to get part of the family managed to get out to Slovakia, and the other half I joined in Irpin, and For those of you who've been watching the news, you will know that Irpin, Bucha, and Hostomel were the main centers of immediate conflict in the beginning of the war. We were there for 6 days. It was a very useful 6 days. I can now tell just by the sound the caliber of artillery and whether it's going outwards or coming in. And then we managed to spend 3 days in a car, the 7 of us, plus Kat, and got to Lviv, where we have set up home with my other members of my family near Lviv and me based in Lviv itself. I made a decision that I am more useful in Ukraine than I am sitting outside. And therefore, I continue the work that we are doing with our local authorities, little municipalities, etc., which I'll tell you about in a minute, but also managing some individual humanitarian activities, such as helping people who wish to leave. And we have people in Germany, France, and now, starting yesterday, my family has started accepting Ukrainians into Scotland. But in addition to that, we are also supporting, or I'm trying to support and raise money for a charity called Partnership for Every Child. And Victoria will give you the link to that.
Right. Yeah.
Do you want to say something? Because nearly all of the children's institutions which are in central and eastern Ukraine have been moved to the west. So there are about 5,000 orphans in the vicinity here, whom Every Child and other agencies like Save the Children, Oxfam are feeding. So any support you can give in that would be most welcome. I also have started with colleagues some activities for shipping in medication and foodstuffs by truck over the border. And I try and support the distribution process because it's very easy still to send missing items to larger cities, but then they have to be distributed to smaller communities, villages, and the elderly who don't have ready access, for example, to a drugstore for medication. So there's a lot of small activities, but there are also activities related to Ukraine as a whole. What we are doing at the moment, which forms part of our own project, is we are designing systems for dialogue between municipal authorities and local population, including internally displaced persons, on reconstruction issues, because eventually people will come back and things will be rebuilt. We are looking at issues connected to the relocation of industry and production from the eastern center to the west temporarily to keep the economy going. And we're also looking at issues of how to assist the government of Ukraine, and particularly the Ministry of Territories and Communities Development, in creating what they are already calling the Marshall Plan for Ukraine for after the hostilities are over. So I think that brings me more or less up to date on events in Ukraine.
Yeah, Stephen. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
No, go ahead, dear.
No, I just wanted to say this is amazing, and thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I know from other people who are watching us for doing what you're doing, supporting Ukraine. And also, it's amazing that you're actually, the current project you're working in is also can become a very instrumental part in helping the country to keep its economy going and rebuild once this nightmare is over.
Well, Victoria, it's not a question of rebuilding when the nightmare is over. I mean, I look at it in two ways. First of all, the economy and social services have to be kept going during the conflict. Yes,
right.
And there's a risk that people will see the conflict as a sort of hiatus or pause in the development of the economy and society, whereas it's an environment in which certain processes should continue. It's very important that the Ukrainian economy keeps going. To put it bluntly, economy equals taxes equals tanks. It's as simple as that, yes?
Right.
It's also jobs and income and all the rest of it, but ultimately the Ukrainian society requires a functioning economy in order to protect itself.
Right.
That's the first thing. The second thing is that the social services issues have to continue because The burdens on social services at local level are, of course, completely on a new level. For example, if we look at Lviv, okay, it's a city of 700,000 people, of which perhaps 200,000 fled across the border at the beginning of the conflict. But the actual current population, i.e. those who are physically present, is close to 1 million, which means that for all medical, social services, even food stores and everything else are facing a huge burden of additional mouths, let's put it as bluntly as that, who have to be supported one way or another. And the people who come here and those with whom I work on possible relocation to Europe permanently or temporarily, they are not financially well off. Yeah, so lots of different schemes are developed for humanitarian aid and other things like restaurants offering free meals, etc., because we have to understand that the people who have come here have come sometimes with very little. Now, I'm not the best example, but for example, when we left Irpin, I had one T-shirt, one sweater, a pair of trousers, and fortunately in a pocket, a couple of spare pairs of underpants. That was it. And many other people have left with nothing or next to nothing to escape the war. And many of them will go back to nothing or next to nothing because of the level of destruction that has taken place in some areas. Now, having said that, the picture isn't universally bleak. First of all, the damage is geographically concentrated into only a part of Ukraine. But even that concentration results in an overflow or a spillover into other regions and communities who have to deal with the, so to speak, the side effects or the results of the military aggression. So the limited damage geographically, terrible in some places, non-existent in others, is one factor. The other factor is the degree of social mobilization in Ukraine at the moment is absolutely astonishing. I look around, for example, in Zhytomyr region, where people are doing the distribution of humanitarian aid, but paying for it out of their own pockets. I.e., they take their car or their minivan, and in spite of the fact that Russian army may not be far away, they are driving around to villages to the elderly with food, medication, extra clothing, etc. So the social mobilization in Ukraine is to me astonishing. Now, I want to build on that. And that is why we are looking at how to structure dialogues between the local authorities and the population to ensure that that degree of social mobilization continues in the future. And we will be training the municipalities on how to organize these events, how to do it online very often. Mm-hmm. They have to be online. You don't know where your constituents are. Your constituents might be in Poland. They might be in Sweden, for all I know, but you still want to involve them in the development of the community in which they still feel they belong.
Right.
Now, perhaps the Ukrainian situation is also different from many other crisis situations we have seen in that Ukrainians who are leaving Ukraine at the moment are not mainly leaving permanently. There are already of those who left from Western Ukraine, there are already people coming back. I was at the border on Monday and there were more people coming into Ukraine than were going out to Poland because people do not want to be away from home. Even my family who come from Irpin, they would like to go back to Irpin as soon as possible. So Ukrainians you see in Europe are likely to be temporary visitors. They are temporary visitors who have a culture where they don't want to be on social service benefits. Everybody who's going wants a job. This creates problems perhaps for the European job market, but it shows what Ukrainians are like. And their energy is also going to be a major factor in reconstruction once the war is over. So I'm very hopeful. The military situation, of course, gives cause for hope. But I think in the long term for Ukraine, it is the social mobilization aspect of the war which is going to provide a huge boost to the reconstruction process.
Yes, and the determination and the patriotism of the Ukrainian people is just amazing. Well, I'm currently in the United States, and of course, I watch mostly the U.S. News and the CNN, and there is such huge coverage for Ukraine, and they feature regular people just who are leaving their home, and it's amazing that all of them say, "Yeah, I want to come back. I want to come back to my home." And it's just heartbreaking. Like you said, a lot of them just left with nothing, and this is why this kind of work that you're doing and other organizations are doing, trying to support these people, find them homes, temporary homes, is just incredible. And I just wanted to acknowledge some of the participants who are here with us. So Anya is joining us from the Netherlands.
Hi, Anya.
She's watching us.
Nice to see you.
She is there, and then we have Tim Son, who was my mentor, teaching me how to do live broadcasts. He is in Pennsylvania. Thank you, Tim, for always being there to help and support. And Ron is saying, Stephen, thank you for making this despite the difficult time in Ukraine and joining us. Ron is actually now just left Kazakhstan. We just talked last night, and he worked for many years, so he is on his way to the next destination, wherever it can be. And Ron told me that he's considering actually staying in Europe and possibly
if he wants to come and help me in Ukraine, I will find a job for him. I'm always looking for extra hands. I have some volunteers in Poland I'm working with at the moment, because the big problem when you send somebody abroad, yes, they have to come to a point of exit, like Lviv or Mukachevo, it's on the Slovak border. They have to live somewhere whilst they get their visa, which, as I said before, many of them don't have much in the way of money. And then they have to be transported to their destination. Then they have to be looked after. And then, to be honest, I would say nearly everybody here has some degree of PTSD, even if it's only mild. Those who come from places like Kharkiv, of course, they need a lot of emotional support. But I wanted to make one other point before I see Ron has already asked a question. He is stealing my thunder, as they say in English, because I was going to talk about strategy next, but I will do that.
Well, before you continue, I just wanted to say that Gulsum is also saying hi, but it shows as Gabriel Al-Salem Foundation because she's one of the directors. She's posting on our Facebook. So she's also in Turkey, actually. She's in Istanbul. And then Valentina is asking us whether there will be a recording. Yes, Valentina, all these live broadcasts, they are saved on our media channels. You can always go back for a replay. So yes, and then I'm going back to Ron's question, and then just let you continue, please, Stephen.
Yeah, I will answer Ron's question in a minute, but I would like to make a statement which is not always very welcome amongst my Ukrainian colleagues. And this is the statement that one should not confuse Russia with the regime of President Putin. I understand that in a conflict, nationalism tends to be a little bit like a shotgun. It scatters the pellets rather than shooting directly. And so everybody is thinking of Russia versus Ukraine. No, it isn't. It is a certain part of the Russian elite and the Russian people who support aggression against the Ukraine. And I wanted to give a shout out for all of the Russians I know who are opposed to this war and with whom I speak regularly. I won't say who they are because we're always only doing things through VPN, of course, because for even calling it a war, you can get up to 15 years at the moment. And that's the latest criminal code amendment. But I also want to say thank you to the Russians in Europe whom I know who actually arrange places for evacuees, including my evacuees, to find a home in the West. So I don't want to think of this as I had a discussion this morning. I don't want to call this the Russian-Ukrainian war. It is, in fact, the Ukrainian war of national liberation throwing out all of the old ex-Soviet debris, which should have been got rid of over the last 30 years. So I don't want people who support Ukraine to forget that there are many people in Russia, including Russians abroad, who also support Ukraine, okay? Let's not forget. And it's even tougher for them to support Ukraine than it is for us or for Ukrainians to support Ukraine. So
Yeah, well, I want to share a little bit of my personal experience. Well, I'm Russian living in the United States. I was born in Ukraine, in Kirovograd at that time, which is an eastern part of Ukraine. Now it's called Kropivnitsky. I have
yes,
family in Ukraine. I also have family in Russia, in Moscow.
yeah,
And now it's the tragedy that, they're split and they don't even know when they'll be able to see each other. Well, part of my family now left Ukraine and they are in Germany with my other family, but some older people had to stay in Ukraine because they couldn't travel. So it's
yeah.
just all over the place, and it's the tragedy of it, and it's insane.
Well, I mean, I know this is not really part of our dialogue today, but if there's anything I can do for your relatives in Ukraine, please shoot me an email, dear. Okay?
Thank you, but they are okay. I'm in touch with their daughter who is in Moscow, and of course she cannot support them, directly. But there are actually volunteers who are bringing medication that they need, because they're older people. They need the supply of certain medications like the thyroid, and of course it's
Yeah.
in a huge shortage right now. So far they're good, but we are keeping. Well, I'm staying in touch. So if there is anything I could do on my end, I will do. But thank you so much. Yeah.
No, I mean, actually, you brought up a topic which is relevant. I don't want to ignore Ron's question because it's very interesting for me. But this is many people want to send things to the Ukraine. The things that are most needed, if you can get it to Ukrainians, are medication and money. I say this because there is a huge humanitarian aid center near the center of Lviv. I drive past each day where they are giving out clothing. Now, I understand, it gives me a lump in my throat to think of all the people in the West who have donated clothing and other items for shipment to Ukraine. But this is not really what is needed. It is needed in the sense that people have had very little when they've come from the East or the center to the West. But it is much better if these people have money so that they can buy things in Lviv or elsewhere. Because the objective is to keep the economy going. Yes, we want money into stores, we want money into food production, we want money into anything that Ukraine can still make. And unfortunately, if you just send goods, you are killing off the local economy to some extent. I
Well,
know.
that's
I
good
know.
to know.
Yeah, I mean, so if so, donate money to organizations which will purchase things locally for use by locals or refugees, and that way you support the economy as well as supporting the people who need the help.
This is a very good advice, and thank you for sharing it. And of course,
Yeah.
it's in a way it's simpler to send money, because even some of the the companies like Western Union and a lot of others, they don't even charge a fee now for sending cash, so that's some help.
Yeah, well, I mean, the other point is,
Donations.
I mean, it makes sense to send to Ukraine what cannot be sourced or made in Ukraine, and that applies to pharmaceutical products, where my sister and I, for example, have been looking at how to help an Australian producer ship stuff into Ukraine. But for many other things, the Ukrainian is able to supply what is needed, but they need the money in order to do the supply process and to keep the economy rolling, so to speak. Yeah. So that is why I say money is good. The other comment is that to send money takes 10 seconds online, yes? To send a truck takes days. And so the aid just gets through quicker if it's cash.
Right.
Simple as anyway, that's the end of my spiel in what needs to be done. For now, I'd like to answer Ron's question about strategy.
Right. Let me put it back on the screen. So he's
Yeah.
asking about the strategy to relocate some of the activities, economic activities, to the western part.
What is happening, Ron? For example, I have a friend who used to be the head of the regional development agency in Ternopil, which is the next oblast over from Lviv. What is tending to happen is that companies who had production in the center or eastern Ukraine are relocating stock, not production at the moment, but stock to safe areas to be sure that it isn't pillaged, to put it as bluntly as that. There is not actually major relocation of production at this stage. Because, of course, we have no idea how long the war is going to last, and relocating production is incredibly expensive because it's a matter of, a production line is not just the machinery and the housing, it's also the people who work it, the entire processes, the electricity supply, the sewage, the water, you name it. So that's difficult. At the moment, relocation is relating only to stock. And I think it's an exaggeration to describe it as a strategy because businesses are going to do it for their own business interests rather than because anything that the Ukrainian government might be thinking about in terms of long-term relocation. I do not believe at the moment there is a long-term intention to relocate industry to the West on a permanent basis. The idea is to reconstruct the center and east so that the economy remains geographically balanced. But I think many businesses will be thinking that even after peace, Kiev will still only be 150 kilometers from the Russian border. So it might make sense to have production in Vinnytsia or Ternopil or Kamenets-Podolsky instead. So the government may just have to accept that there's going to be a long-term drift or relocation away from risky borders. So it's not so much a strategy for that. What is going to be developed is a strategy for reconstruction. And the debate is going to be, does Ukraine want to build Ukraine as it was before the war? Or does it want to look at the war, terrible as it is, as an opportunity where it is possible to build a better Ukraine than there was before the war? Yes? I had a discussion on Tuesday with somebody connected with the ministry about this because, a key issue is, do we want to rebuild Soviet-style panel housing when we rebuild cities in the East? The answer is probably no. The housing stock is destroyed. You don't rebuild using the old techniques. You rebuild a new town using new techniques. But this is something for the future. It's good that people are already thinking about the issues that come along post-war. But on the other hand, of course, we don't know how long the conflict is going to take or what Ukraine will look like after it. I hope that answers Ron's question.
Right, that's a great comment. About rebuilding and what the country wants to look like once this is over. Apparently, Ukraine wants to be more like Europe rather than more like the old, Soviet state, right? So that makes sense.
Well, I mean, the irony is that I've always seen the western part of Ukraine as being almost like a successor state to the Austro-Hungarian Empire in the architecture, the Catholicism, and all the rest of it. Yes, whereas the center and eastern Ukraine was much more Soviet in a way.
That's
And
true.
so perhaps it's a question of the center and east becoming a bit more like the West in terms of cultural outlook and management and even ergonomics. Who knows? I mean, there's so many big unknowns, but also so many major opportunities that can be used once things quieten down a bit. For me, the important thing is the inclusion aspect, which is the reason why our project is concentrating so much on the issue of designing and helping municipalities to have good dialogue in future with their stakeholders, which are basically the local population. Now, like all administrative systems, there's a tendency for things to be a bit vertical. Yes. I don't want to be seen as criticizing particular ministries, for example, but having worked with children's homes, sometimes the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Social Policy have worked in parallel rather than horizontally in resolving issues. This sort of verticality, if there is such a word, is beginning to be broken down effectively by the war, because problems have to be person-centered or centered to a group of stakeholders, and therefore greater cooperation is required between the government agencies. This becomes even more the case if we have a good dialogue whereby the stakeholders, who are the clients of these systems, yes, actually express the services that they want. So I'm all for making sure that the clients are articulate and are able to forcibly, and the word forcibly is important here, forcibly express their preferences to local government. So that's what I want to concentrate on.
I also know that when we talked about your experience as an international development consultant, you mentioned that you like to work bottom up rather than top down. Is that's part of the inclusion, and that's probably why you can achieve great results, and that's the way to go on
I don't
any
know.
of the development projects.
I hope you can hear this, but can you hear touch wood?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, you touched the wood.
I mean, in Ukraine, it's probably going to be easy to achieve a lot of the bottom-up development, because from 2016 to 2020, Ukraine went through a process, a very complicated process of decentralization. And the decentralization consisted of two parts. One part was that many small local authorities merged to create what were called amalgamated hramadas, but I call them municipalities in English. So they have now, in many cases, more of how can I put it, like a critical mass for being able to do things themselves. And secondly, more authority was hived down from national government through to regional government and then to the municipalities, to allow the municipalities to have a greater say in how they saw themselves developing. So we now have an architecture which consists of national development plans at the top, which tend to be rather framework and loose, with regional ones, which contain a lot of projects of benefit for municipalities. And now we had got to the stage where maybe 40% of municipalities also had their own local development strategies agreed with stakeholders. Unfortunately, the other 60% hadn't completed them by the time the invasion started, but it's primarily because those municipalities are the ones which are taking the longest to merge, yes, and merging local government units is quite an extensive and difficult process. But the fact that we actually have a high level of decentralization in Ukraine means that the bottom-up approach is perhaps easier. Doesn't mean to say I'm going to ignore regional or national level, because we work very closely with the ministry at national level. But it also means that it's that municipalities can continue to operate even when cut off from each other by a military event like the Russian invasion, because they are beginning to get used to doing things for themselves and working as much as autonomously as possible. So it's had a major benefit from that viewpoint, not one that was planned, I hasten to add. But the dialogue is much easier when you've got a decentralization process in place. In the last 5 years, I've seen enormous strides in that sense.
Which donor organizations have been working in Ukraine right before the war, and which are staying? Meaning the ones that the large ones that fund these big projects that you're on.
Well, I mean, I once foolishly tried to make a list of all of the donor projects that were operating in Ukraine, and when I got to 250, I gave up.
But they're funded by probably just a number of large organizations, like the World Bank, probably the European Union is there, of course, the UN.
I would say in our own project, the ULEAD with Europe program is a program which is actually run by GIZ, a state corporation of the German Ministry of Economy and Cooperation. And that is funded by the EU and some of the member states. I think all member states have a project presence in Ukraine of various levels, dependent on their GDPs, I guess. All of the UN organizations are working in Ukraine. The World Bank is working in Ukraine. IMF is working in Ukraine. We have European Investment Bank has a substantial number of provides credit lines to the Ministry of Economy, Ministry of Finance, which are partly managed by the Ministry of Communities, which are accessible for municipalities. We have the EBRD, of course, and we have a very large, substantial number of commercial banking institutions which have been active in Ukraine in the past. Now, I think that, of course, the commercial banking sector is going to be very badly hit by the events that are taking place at the moment, but the international institutions which have projects or provide financing to Ukraine are not going to withdraw from Ukraine, and the discussion at the moment is the level of financial commitment that they are willing to provide to Ukraine in the reconstruction process. And at the moment, it's too early to say what the exact sums are going to be because the commitment sizes is coming through. We are trying to calculate how much is being committed. And I could probably give you a better figure on this in a couple of weeks' time. But the point is that everybody wants to be involved in the reconstruction of Ukraine afterwards. And one of the big tasks for the national government is going to be to coordinate these activities. From my viewpoint, a big problem is also going to be how that this all filters down to the municipal level, because the action has to be done at the local level.
Exactly, yeah.
So, for example, in early February, I went to Dnipropetrovsk region, to a town called Pavlohrad, to look at a project which was between a group of municipalities for improving the local maternity home. Yes, Rodilny Dom. I'm not sure how you call a maternity home in Ukrainian, but never mind. It was the maternity and mother's home. And they were doing it on their own based on an agreement between the municipalities, partly from budget and partly because they wanted financing from international development agencies to do it as a health project. Now, that sort of mechanism needs to be safeguarded for the future, because it's going to be the case that some municipalities will not be able to reconstruct on their own. It's going to have to be groups of municipalities cooperate together in order to rebuild. I think a good example actually would be the three that were most affected by the first stage of the war: Hostomel, Bucha, and Irpin. Now, they border on each other. It doesn't make sense for them to individually develop or reconstruct. They would be better possibly in a consortium working together, which gives also a greater critical mass for the purposes of financing.
Gulsum is saying that they are in Kazakhstan sending humanitarian support to Ukraine, including medicine and kids' food and other necessary things. But just like you mentioned, medicine and money is probably the most critical. And
yes.
But it's definitely great that the other countries are supporting. And then Gulsum also saying, my group of business people, where I'm a member, leading by our friend, so working hard to fundraising and sending humanitarian support. Yeah, from Kazakhstan.
Well done, Gumsum and the people of Kazakhstan, because food supplies are also an issue, particularly for kids. The most recent activity that I'm about to be involved in, because I'm going to cover the transport costs, is that we've been bringing in items that are becoming scarce on the Ukrainian market. And there's a scarcity at the moment of animal fats and vegetable oils, and as well as the medicines. And I have to confess that yesterday I did something which was probably not strictly ethical, that some of this animal fats goes to a restaurant which provides food for free to people who need it. And so I went and tested it. So I had a very nice lunch, possibly maybe out of something that Gulsum had sent, but I did pay for it, okay? So foodstuffs, I'm glad to see that you're thinking about foodstuffs as well. We are going to have a food security problem in Ukraine because, of course, the spring sowing in the center and the east is not going to take place. Or if it takes place, there's not going to be any crops this year. So food is
Right.
also an issue for Ukraine. And because Ukraine is a supplier on the world grain market, the Ukrainian problem becomes a food security issue for the rest of the world, to be quite honest. Anyway, thank you very much, Gulsum, and please thank everybody else for doing it.
We have another comment from Dinara Yesenova from Kazakhstan, one of the winners of our award for excellence in consulting, and she's just thanking you for all the information and updates. She's there also, listening to us. I actually have a couple more questions from Ron, who is always so active, asking questions and supporting us, which is great. So he's asking about the involvement of the businesses in providing humanitarian aid and support, the private enterprises.
Right. Well, civil defense is a big issue in Ukraine at the moment. I can tell you that when we finally got evacuated from Irpin, we went through 54 roadblocks to get just out of Kiev region, because everybody and his dog, and sometimes literally his dog, is forming part of the territorial defense units everywhere. There are volunteers from all segments. I was talking to Sergei, a colleague and friend of mine today, who's a businessman, who has basically engaged in the logistics of collecting, transporting, and distributing humanitarian aid using his business skills for a social end. Yes. So whether you count him as a private enterprise, I don't know. He is a private entrepreneur who, like many others, who is involved in the flow of the humanitarian aid. But you see, Ron, there's no clear definition when you're talking with volunteers about what they do. For example, you will send, food to Kharkov in a truck or a bus, and you'll bring people out in the same truck or bus. So the humanitarian evacuation, the humanitarian supply systems are opposite sides or connected parts of the same network. Yeah. As for the traditional business sense, I can think of many businesses who have business skills which are used at the moment for the benefit of Ukraine. But I don't know whether you would include stopping making dresses, ladies' dresses, swapping that for making bulletproof vests. Is that a traditional business sense? The same sewing skills, the same overlock sewing machines are being used for both, the same business processes, same equipment, and the same staff. So I'm not sure it's a traditional business sense. If you'd like to clarify, be delighted to discuss this, but there is no clear border between voluntary and business. They feed each other.
Right. And what I understand, what I see in the news is that a lot of businesses and people who run businesses, they just basically change their role and they become, drivers, or they bring food to people. So it's, again, what is it? It's obviously not the traditional business, but it's something that they make food if they still can, and then distribute it. So it's called, pivoting or just doing whatever is possible under the circumstances.
Absolutely. The key thing, I think, if you're going to provide any support to Ukraine, is to assess what is actually needed on the ground. For example, my criticism of some programs, and I'm not going to name them because these mistakes get made mistakes will be made. I'm sorry about it, but mistakes will be made, is not always checking what is actually needed in Ukraine. And this is going back to the argument where people start sending clothing to Ukraine. Yes? I have friends in the UK who want to send warm clothing to Ukraine, and I explained to them that the clothing that's warm in Ukraine in winter is warmer than anything you would buy in Marks and Spencer's in Manchester, for example. So it's essential always to check what would be most in need at the moment. And I will be honest with you, if any of your listeners actually want to find out from particular municipalities or to get lists of what is in short supply in medication or anything else, I'd be happy to make sure that one of my colleagues who deals with the shipping of stuff actually provides you with a list of what is most in need at the moment, because the situation is extremely dynamic.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah, we can just post this information on the foundation's website,
Yeah,
and
okay.
this way it can be available there for anybody to check. Well, Ron is actually clarifying a little bit. He says basically whether these businesses can be maybe paid, compensated through the aid funding or any government sources for doing what they're doing.
Well, my ideal situation is perhaps this was never popular when I suggested it before, is that aid agencies should be paying businesses to provide services and goods. And that way the economy is kept going and businesses are kept afloat and employment is retained or maintained or protected, let's say protected, yes? At the moment, we have a lot of people, incidentally, who are not working but are still drawing salary. I do not know how long businesses will be able to continue paying people who are actually producing any income, but we need seriously to think about the way in which we use businesses to supply social needs of Ukraine or defense needs of Ukraine so that the businesses remain afloat. So Ron's question is very appropriate.
All right. And then he has another comment about
he's good at questions. I mean, this is like Ron. This is like watching a tennis match.
Yeah, Ron is with us. We should have brought him in the discussion too, but he is just also basically commenting on the fact of that a lot has to be rebuilt and whether it should be rebuilt to match the old way or the new way. And of course here the green technologies are coming up, so wouldn't it be better to start implementing what's better for everybody and for the country? So that's what the next comment is.
I agree. There was a British historian called A.G.P. Taylor who said that the best part of reconstructing London after 1945 had been performed by the Luftwaffe, removing all the ugly old buildings, which of course is a very contentious thing to say in relation to the shelling and bombing in Ukraine. But things will have to be replaced, not just duplicated as they go forward, and therefore green technology, new approaches to housing, new way you design the ergonomics of cities, more use of alternative energy sources, because the coal is mainly in the east, and there's a risk that those parts will be taken over by Russia. So it has to be at the moment looked at as a blank slate in some cases, where you can decide for yourself that you want to go for the green development options or circular economy options. It's interesting that Ron asked the question in relation to COVID-19, because in looking at how to reconstruct and the factors which will be needed to support businesses, we have a very good expert from Slovenia who suggested to us that instead of looking at how to reconstruct industry after military conflict, we should be also looking at the support measures that were undertaken to maintain or get business through COVID-19. In other words, we should teach the war as a natural disaster along with COVID-19. Mm-hmm. So we are in fact looking at the measures that are used to protect or protect jobs and develop business after COVID-19 as one of the range of measures that governments could be using also after the post-conflict. Facilitating such changes, I don't even know where to start how to reply to this particular very short sentence of yours, Ron. But I mean, for me, facilitating the change is making sure that the stakeholders at the bottom level in municipalities make it clear that they want something better than they had before, and explaining to them the advantages of replacing the old with something that is new and better. I will be interested when I'm in London. I'm hoping to visit Royal Society of Engineers, the British Institute of Architects, just to ask them what would they do to produce something better than the old panel Brezhnev era or Stalin era or Khrushchev era housing, as a way of demonstrating that it's possible to build something better, hopefully faster, because we need to build quickly for people to come back. Okay.
All right.
This is turning into a bit into a sermon in some ways, yes?
No, I just wanted to say that, of course, in addition to Ukraine and what is happening now there, and also in your life, because you are part of it, I also wanted to talk a little bit more about your experience as a international development consultant in other countries as well, because you've been working in this industry for over 30 years, but it feels like that what's happening now is so grandiose that it's probably not like anything you've done in the past. Were there any similar experience? I mean, I know you haven't. I don't think you worked in the war zone before, and providing this kind of support. But
I'm afraid that's where you're wrong, dear, because unfortunately I had the misfortune to be in Georgia in 2008. So this is the second time that Mr. Putin has visited me, so to speak.
You have something personal now, definitely, that it's been affecting your personal life.
I'm going to say possibly it's not a good idea to employ me in any country which has a border with Russia. Perhaps I'm the reason, but that would be bragging too much. But no, the point is that good quality international practice is even more relevant now, so that the experience that I have had before will be used even now. I'll give you an example. I'm talking about the dialogue in the municipalities, but a good example, which is better than Ukraine and better than Europe, is I look at the best practice in conducting village community meetings at upazilas in Bangladesh or India. Yes? Right. Good practice for involvement is looking at the way families manage resources like land and water, where I can be looking at some excellent examples in Fiji. No, but nobody thinks about these excellent examples in Fiji, parts of North Africa, or Southeast Asia. So many of the techniques that are useful in international development will be used again in Ukraine. But I think that there's a qualitative difference, because as a consultant so much in the past, these concepts and best practice have been regarded as, how can I put it, fashionable words, something to make gestures towards, etc. But we have an opportunity here actually to make sure that some of these techniques really work in practice. I work for a program which looks at Europe as the main example, but the examples have to be taken from my consultancy experience elsewhere. And that actually brings me to another point I want to make, which is that because of the conflict, it is quite clear that Ukraine is going to become even more Europeanized than it was before the conflict. And therefore, many of the techniques of cohesion policy, regional development that are used in the EU will be used in Ukraine even more than they were used before. Before, they were discussed in terms of the association agreement, but they become practical tools now. However, I have never restricted myself to using examples or experience of Europe, because for me, rapidly developing economies in Asia are, at least in some cases, as good an example which Ukraine should be borrowing from, where we can see it. Give you an example. Regional policy development is in Malaysia is superb. There's no other word for it. I would be quite happy if Ukraine used regional policy development techniques that they use in Malaysia. I might have difficulty explaining to the European Commission why I'm using it in a European project, but still, Ukraine shouldn't restrict the experience that it draws upon and I won't be restricting myself also to the experience I draw on. Wherever I see anything that's useful from previous lives, because it seems almost a lifetime ago that there wasn't a war, will be used in Ukraine.
And it's actually fascinating, yeah, because we would think that these different parts of the world have so many peculiarities that you cannot possibly borrow one experience and apply it to on the other side of the earth, because we would have to be culturally, sensitive. But it's amazing what you're saying, that actually a lot of what you've done in other regions can be directly applicable. And I just hope you can make that argument to whoever you need to make it.
Yeah, I mean, we have the argument of cultural sensitivity. It is essential that we become culturally sensitive in any work that we do, which is one of the reasons why, for example, it is going to become less possible for me to work in Russia, in Ukraine, and I'll have to start taking Ukrainian classes. But the phrase cultural appropriation has become a dirty phrase in Europe and probably North America.
Right.
There are many things that are culturally useful from elsewhere, which can be borrowed and used. And frankly, I think it's a compliment if suddenly Ukraine were to use a model from Asia, for example. I mean, let's face it, the Japan International Cooperation Agency is active in Ukraine in business development, local democracy, social services, etc. Is that bad? I cannot think of two countries that are much more different than Japan and Ukraine, but the projects work. The projects work. And a good idea is a good idea wherever it comes from. It's as simple as that.
That's right. Well, our time is coming to an end, and I know you have a lot of things to do.
Well, I'd like to hear if there are any questions, to be quite honest.
Well, I'm checking, actually, let me see. Well, there is a thank you comment from Ron about, answering his questions. And he's also saying he's boarding a flight to Amsterdam and will be canceling his onward travel. So his volunteer boots will be standing by. So I think Ron is all excited. And now that he has some time on his hands, he just left his big project in Kazakhstan for good. So he might be joining you. And I just wish you and your colleagues and everybody who is helping Ukraine all the very best and all the energy. And of course, stay safe. And we just around the world just can't wait to see the end of this war. And just if we can help in any way we can, we will. I mean, I'm talking like we, because I know that a lot of people are feeling the same way that I do.
Can I also put a little plug in, which is that I'm actually developing a group of volunteer consultants who can work on a pro bono basis with the ministry, because it's going to take ages to get everything sorted out. You know what it's like when you want to do a technical assistance project, it takes time to do the terms of reference and all the rest of it. I would be delighted to hear from anybody who would, regardless of their specialization, who would like to be participating in our work in Ukraine. I'm not asking for a lot of work, but the people who are listening to this broadcast have experiences that I don't. And I'd like to be able to tap into them. If you would like to send Victoria or myself your CV, and then I'm presenting this pool to the ministry so the ministry can see who they can use for short-term jobs.
Let's do the following. Because you said you will also give us a list of the most needed items for donation, so we can put it together and we can post it on the foundation's website, which is I just put in the comments, and everybody can find it, and also in the social media. And then if any volunteers, any consultants would like to do some pro bono work, maybe you can give us some guidelines, like in which areas in particular, or it doesn't really matter.
It doesn't really matter at this stage, because we are left with a situation where some parts of the country will be working from a blank slate. So whether you're working in environment or business or governance or administration or engineering or whatever, all experience is going to be useful. The degree of experience that's required, or how much work will be required, will determine later on when the ministry's overall or the government's overall strategy for reconstruction comes. At the moment, it's at the stage of a methodology with some ideas for the strategy, but you understand, only 5 weeks into a war, actually producing a full model for the Marshall Plan is not possible at this stage. It will come very quickly, I'm sure. These are Ukrainians; they don't hang around.
Yes, and well, at the end, I just want to say, glory to Ukraine. Slava
Yes,
Ukraini.
Geroem Slava. Okay.
Geroem Slava. That's incredible what they're doing. The whole world is watching, and they are heroes.
And Ukrainians are really grateful to all of you, whether you provide material or moral support. That sense of having so many people at your back is a major morale booster. So I want to say I don't have any right to speak on behalf of Ukraine, but I seize that right for the moment to say thank you to all of you out there who are supporting Ukraine.
We also get a comment from Rose Horowitz, whom I met when I was learning to do the broadcasting. She says hello from Connecticut. She's been also participating, listening to our discussion. Thank you, Rose. It's great to have you with us. Well, we have to be wrapping up. Unfortunately, the time is over for our broadcast. And again, I know Stephen has to go back to his very important work right now and also take some rest. And I just want to make a quick announcement, since we are now committed for sure to do our broadcast on the first day of every month. So next one will be on May 1st. And I have already, actually discussed with our next speaker that he will be available, and that will be Roman Vakulchuk, who is currently in Norway. He is originally from Kazakhstan, so he will be... he works for like a senior researcher at the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs. And he will be talking to us about his experience in Central Asia and the uniqueness of Central Asia, and a lot of other interesting things that he has to share. So please tune in on May 1st at the same time. Let's keep it at 1 in the afternoon GMT time, because I know of the summertime changes, sometimes things get shifted around. So this will be our time, and we will be welcoming Dr. Roman Vakulchuk. For now, thank you so much again to Stephen for your time, and best of luck to you, and please stay safe, you and your family and your colleagues, and we'll look forward to more updates. And again, if there is anything that we can help with, or our foundation can help with, our award winners, our consultants, please let us know. We'll be posting more information on the website. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, I say goodbye in Ukrainian. Do побачення. Have a nice evening. Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.